In this video, we're going to dive into the 7 wounds that often result from childhood rejection. Have you ever felt like you're carrying around invisible scars from your past? Maybe you struggle with low self-esteem, have a constant fear of abandonment, or find it hard to trust others. These feelings might be rooted in experiences of rejection from your childhood. Childhood rejection can leave deep emotional wounds that affect us well into adulthood, shaping our behaviors, relationships, and self-perception. Let's dive into those 7 wounds caused by childhood rejection. Number 1, low self-esteem. When our parents or someone else in our life that we see as important or possibly, kind of like above us, like I said, teacher, coach, another family member, when they reject us, we can believe that something is wrong with us. We can have shame thoughts. We can think that we're just not capable or that we aren't doing something necessary to receive that kind of love and support. Therefore, as we grow up, and probably these things are happening over and over again, right? It's not just a one-time thing. This is consistent. It's going to impact our self-esteem and make us think that we aren't good enough. A good example of this would be like a child who was constantly criticized by a parent. Parents always saying, oh, you never get this right, or you never try hard enough, or how come you didn't get picked for the lead in the play or get an A+ on this, right? Always nitpicking, always criticizing. That can leave us as we get older feeling so badly about ourselves that we don't have any self-worth. We don't understand why anyone would want to be around us. And how this can manifest as we become adults is that we can have a difficult time accepting compliments. I've heard from a lot of you that when people do show us love and support, we don't know what to do with it. Sometimes we can even want to run from it. We're like, that doesn't seem safe. I don't even know how to deal with that. I'd rather not, right? We can also have a lot of self-doubt and seek validation from others all the time because internally we don't talk very nicely to ourselves, right? And so we can look outward all the time for someone to tell us that we're worthy, that we're valuable, that we are someone worth having around. And it's kind of, we get caught in this cycle of like wanting it and seeking that validation, maybe receiving some of it and then not knowing what to do with it and shutting down and doing it over and over again. And this can really have a detrimental effect on our self-esteem. Number 2, fear of abandonment. Now, building off of low self-esteem, if we don't think we're good enough, we can consistently fear that people are going to leave us, right? Rejection can cause us to feel alone, and we can worry that others in our life will see our faults and decide, we're just not worth being around. And so we can often have this intense worry, which can lead to, kind of what we'd call anxious attachment behaviors, where we want to cling to someone so tightly because the fear that they might leave us would just reinforce this belief that we're not good enough, right? That because we've been rejected, that we're worthy of that rejection. Going back to those shame thoughts I was talking about, you can see how these all kind of build together. If from a young age we were rejected and we felt rejected, then we can worry that that's just going to follow us. And anybody who tells us they love us or decides to be around, it's just inevitable. They're going to leave us at some point. And so we can do this kind of clinging behavior because we fear so intensely that they'll at one point decide we're not lovable or realize we're not lovable and leave us. And a specific example could be a child whose parent, like let's say they left, there was a nasty divorce and the parent just moved away and they lost touch with them. If this happens early on in our life, I've talked about this when it comes to attachment a lot, but then we believe we can't really count on people. We're not sure if they're going to be there or not. And so it can cause us to be clingy and have anxious behavior in our relationships. And as we get older, this will continue to grow and we can feel very insecure in friendships or romantic relationships. We can have a lot of anxiety if a loved one isn't available. Let's say we tried to call them and they don't pick up, or we texted them, they haven't gotten back to us. It's been over a day or it's been over an hour, whatever our tolerance is. If someone's not available, it can spin us out. We can be like, oh, they don't want to be around me. They realize how terrible I am, right? We can have those spiraling negative thoughts. And we can also find ourselves having an over-reliance on others for our emotional stability. What I mean by that is that we always look to others to soothe our anxiety. It's almost like we need people to calm our nervous system down rather than what I would encourage you to do. And we'll talk more about this in a bit, but to find ways to calm yourself down, right? We can't always count on other people, which I know sounds like a terrible thing to say, but we can't control them. They have their own lives, right? All we can control is ourselves. And so I want to make sure that we're empowered and not overly relying on someone else to make us feel okay. Number 3, difficulty trusting others. If we feel rejected by the people in our lives that are really important to us, like I said, it can be parents, but not always. It could be another member of our family, a teacher, a coach, a best friend. When we feel rejected at a young age, that wound is so deep that we can think, I can't survive that again. So therefore, I don't want to trust anybody else. I'm not going to let anybody else in because when I did, they pushed me out. And so having rejection happen can allow us to feel, or cause us rather, to feel like we can't count on anybody else and develop what I call toxic independence. Now, toxic independence is an extreme form of independence. Independence itself is healthy, right? We're supposed to be able to make decisions on our own, do things without having to check in with other people, feel empowered to make choices and fix things in our home, for example. But if we feel like we can't rely on anybody else, we can only count on ourselves to show up, that's when it becomes toxic. And this is all born out of this belief that we can never trust that someone's going to be there. We can't trust that someone's going to show up for us. To offer you a specific example, it could be when we're a child. Let's say we have a friend that we grow up with, like our best friend, and they betray us. Maybe they share our secrets with someone else. And so now we can feel, I can't really trust anybody to be there. I don't want to form close bonds with anyone because then they're going to know enough about me to potentially hurt me with it. And that wound or that betrayal that we felt from a young age can lead to us not being able to trust people. And as we grow up, so how this moves into adulthood is then we don't want to open up to anybody. We don't want to give them anything to hurt us with, right? We can be incredibly suspicious of others' motives, always thinking like, what do you want from me? Or difficulty forming meaningful connections. Because if we're not letting people in, that means they probably don't know much about us, which means that we maybe don't know much about them. And therefore, those relationships or those connections aren't really fulfilling. They're not really giving us what we need out of our relationships. They're kind of blunted. Number 4, emotional numbness. Oh God, I want to feel again. When we feel rejected, this can lead to us wanting to disconnect from the emotional experience, right? Because being rejected is painful. And I don't know about you, but whenever I experience something that is really painful and really difficult, I often will think to myself, I don't know if I can go through that again, right? I like a bad breakup, or even when my dad passed away, when there's been things that have happened in my life that are really trying and really painful, I often think like, I don't know if I could survive that again. And a lot of us have that experience. It's a very normal response, right? That was painful and uncomfortable. I don't want to go through it again. I don't know if I can. Therefore, I emotionally numb out. It's kind of like a defense mechanism. And it's, acknowledging or admitting that we feel like we don't belong or that we aren't good enough is a painful experience. And so we're going to do everything we can to disconnect from that, to numb out, to pretend it doesn't exist. I don't feel that way, right? And so a specific example of this would be, let's say we're a child and we were consistently ignored. We talk about emotional neglect a lot, right? We were always ignored by our parents or caregivers. And now, because that wasn't addressed when we were a kid, right? Let's say we cried and cried and cried, or we reached out for support from them and we got nothing. Now we can have trouble expressing emotions because why bother? No one ever showed up for me. What's it worth? And so that numbing out, that disconnecting is often a result of us being rejected in childhood. And the way that this can play out as we get older is kind of the same. We have detachment from our feelings. We can have a difficult time empathizing with others. And we can use all sorts of distractions to avoid emotional pain. I could see this leading to things like drug or alcohol addiction, shopping addiction, exercise addiction, maybe self-injury urges or eating disorder behaviors, right? All of that is kind of done as a way to distract ourselves from the pain that we don't want to feel. Number 5, people-pleasing tendencies.
How's the temp in here? Is it cool enough? Okay, I got an AC if we need it. Or we could just bust out that wall, honestly. How's everyone's first 60 seconds been here? Good? You promise? Okay, are you mad at me? Great, let's do this. Wait, who said they were thirsty again? Am I talking too much?
When we don't feel that we are accepted, we can do everything in our power to try to earn that acceptance. Instead of it being given freely like it should be. That's like a healthy part of growing up, is feeling like we are seen, we are heard, we are understood, and we are accepted by our family or by our friends or by our close peer group, right? That's a part of us developing healthily. But when we don't get that, we can honestly have an internal kind of freak out and try to figure out what we can do to get that back, to be accepted, to have people like us. And that's where people-pleasing comes in. And we often think, I know personally, I always thought about people-pleasing, or thought that people-pleasing had more to do with me being a good person and wanting other people to feel good, right? I am trying to please others. However, as I have been told by my therapist, that's not the case. People-pleasing is actually a way for me to assuage my own anxieties, meaning I don't feel okay or maybe safe or maybe accepted until you're happy. Because if you're happy, then I can be happy. And so when we feel this kind of rejection, that means that we're always looking out to other people for some glimmer, some flicker of acceptance, some flicker of excitement, somebody being glad that we're there. And the best way we can think to get that is by trying to make them happy all the time. And so that's why we can do this. And this can present itself in us like walking on eggshells. We can struggle to say no. We can find ourselves overbooking, double booking ourselves, where we said yes to a bunch of things all at the same time. We can do all sorts of these behaviors as a way to put other people's needs first. Now, to give you a specific example of how this could present when we're a child, we could have sought approval from our parents. Let's say they completely ignored us, right? We were emotionally neglected as children. Then we do everything in our power to seek approval from them. And we're always compliant. We're getting straight A's. We can have some perfectionistic tendencies and do all of that as a way to hopefully, finally, get their love and attention. Now, as we get older, we can have a difficult time asserting ourselves. We overcommit, can't say no. We put other people's needs over our own. And we can even feel like it's not okay for us to take up any space or like speak up for ourselves, because that means we're taking up more emotional space than we maybe should, or we're taking it from someone else. And so that's how this can play out when it comes to rejection and people-pleasing behavior. Number 6, perfectionism. When we're rejected as a child, we can strive for perfection as a way of avoiding another instance where we feel rejected. Being rejected is such a painful thing that we're going to do everything in our power to ensure it doesn't happen again. And the only thing we often feel we control, especially when we're a child, is ourselves. And so that's why the people-pleasing behavior we just talked about comes into play. And that's why perfection is also a piece of this, because we're going to try to do everything just so, with the hopes that then someone will accept us, that then we will fit in, that then we'll feel seen and heard and understood. There's so much research, but there's so much to talk about when it comes to being a person and the value that we place, whether we want to admit it or not, on being accepted and part of a group. I talk all the time about how important it is for us to be reminded that we're not alone with this, that we're not in this on our own. That's really powerful, and that's a huge piece of healing. And that's why we do all these things. That's why if we feel rejected as a child, we try to act in a perfect way, because we're trying so hard to fit in, to become part of the group, and to be accepted. And perfectionism, I read this, and I'm probably butchering it, but I read this in my book, The Artist's Way, that I was doing, that workbook. It's beautiful. And the author said something to the effect of like, perfectionism isn't us striving for the best. It's us looking for the worst in ourselves. And I thought that was a really powerful and important thing to consider when we talk about perfection, that we aren't actually looking for the best. Instead, we're looking for the worst. That's what we focus on. Instead of the 90% that we got on that test as a kid, maybe we looked at the 10% we got wrong. And as we get older, it can play out in the same way. It's not all the successes we've had in our lives. It's this one thing that didn't quite go right? It's that one relationship that ended, or that one promotion we didn't get when we thought we would. We can focus on those things. And so just be aware of that. But I want to give you a specific example of how this could play out in childhood. Now, if we had, they call them tiger moms or a helicopter parent or someone that's like really overbearing on their child, and they only praised you for achievements that you had that were at a certain level, and they had unrealistic standards for you, that leads to you thinking that you're only going to get love, attention, or feel like you're part of the group if you receive 100%, if you're perfect. That's the only way that we know that we will get that support and love that we so desperately need. Now, as we get older, this can mean that we are chronically dissatisfied. I would argue we'd probably feel burnt out a lot, right? Because burnout occurs when the effort that we put into something isn't at least commensurate or equal with the benefit that we get or the reward. And if we don't feel satisfied because it's never good enough, right? Then we're going to put in a lot of effort and that reward just isn't there. And then we can have an intense fear of making mistakes as a result. And so just be aware if you find yourself always focusing on the negative, always focusing on that 5% that you didn't quite get or that one thing that went wrong, because it could be as a result of us feeling rejected as a child. Number 7, self-sabotage. When we felt rejected from a very young age, we can believe somewhere deep inside ourselves that we aren't worthy, that we aren't worth it, that we're not good enough. Therefore, we might get in our own way as to prove that belief again. I know sometimes this is hard for people to understand. Like, why do I get in my own way? It's because we don't believe that we are worth it, that we've earned it. And even if it does show up, like I talked about previously, like sometimes when people give us compliments or support or good things happen, we don't know what to do with it. It feels a little uncomfortable. We're not really sure what they want from us or if they're going to hang around. Maybe we're worried they're going to abandon us, right? And so because of all these fears, because of all this pain and discomfort, we'd rather kind of ignore it or push it away. And so as a way of doing that, we sabotage to kind of keep us where we are. Because where we are, we understand. We know. It's comfortable. Doesn't mean it's healthy or that it feels good, but we at least know what to expect. And so we can kind of hold ourselves there as a result of feeling rejected because we feel like this is where we belong. And so we cannot stand up for ourselves. We cannot want to take that promotion. We can do all of these things to get in our own way so that we don't have to be challenged, so that we don't potentially set ourselves up to feel more pain. An example of how this could play out in childhood is, let's say we had a really intense coach who always told us that we were never going to amount to anything, would point out each and every fault, and would say things to us like, you know what, maybe just try out again next year. All this kind of like poo-pooing, pushing us down, setting things aside, ignoring us. That could cause us to feel like we're never going to succeed. And now unconsciously we start undermining our own efforts. And as we get into adulthood, we can find ourselves procrastinating. We can be scared of success and engage in behaviors that prevent us from reaching the goals that we set. Like we could break up with that person who finally treats us well. We can procrastinate on things at work only to turn something in late and end up not being up for that promotion that we actually deserve. We can be doing well and then have an outburst with our friends and cause a big fight. It could be all types of things that we do as a way of holding us where we truly don't belong, but where we believe we are most comfortable, where we believe that we're under the least amount of threat. When it comes to rejection in childhood, it's really important for us to recognize these wounds and the ways that it shows up for us. Because if we don't understand something, we can't change it or heal from it, right? And so just maybe take note of how this has shown up for you. Which of these signs do you find present themselves in your life the most? And I would really encourage you, if you find this impacting you day in and day out, please reach out for help. I know we often think we have to wait to get into therapy until we're at our worst, but I'm here to tell you that the sooner we get in, the better. The sooner we're able to identify, hey, I think I felt rejected in school growing up because of this, and it's playing out this way, and I don't like it. As a therapist, that's incredibly helpful. Then we can work on some behavioral change, managing the thought patterns that we find ourselves stuck in. You can also find free support groups online if therapy is not something you can afford. There's also lower cost therapy options. I have links in my description to BetterHelp, and they offer a discount. There's also Talkspace. There's all sorts of things out there. So if you find this getting in the way of you living a healthy, happy life, please reach out and please speak up. And also chat within our community. And I have workbooks and workshops available on my website, katiemorton.com, at it's cheaper rates than maybe going to therapy full time. But however you can get that extra support, let's reach out and speak up, because it can and will get better. Have a wonderful week. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.